House prices continue to stay low. Good news for buyers, not so good for sellers. The latest Real Estate Institute figures show the median house price is now just over $770,000. Let's take a look at how those numbers have tracked over the last 5 years, which include, of course, the COVID pandemic. Starting in 2020, moving through to the peak in November 2021, reaching $925,000. Then slowly coming down again to hit today's figure at the end of February this year.
New Zealand house prices have crashed, and even after 12 months of interest rate cuts, there's absolutely no rebound in sight. This is in complete contrast to Australia, where house prices have reached new all-time highs in nearly all major cities. But New Zealand has proved that housing bubbles don't always last forever. I'm Biko Konstantinos, and that's what we're going to talk about today. My son came up to me the other day and said, "Hey Dad, can you explain what an eclipse is?" So I replied, "No, son." Yes, that was bloody terrible, but guess what? So is my content. So why don't you like this video and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. The novel 1984 by George Orwell, shockingly, is becoming more true every single day. Now let's check out what's happening in New Zealand. Now if we check out the median house prices from New Zealand, we can see how house prices started rising from the mid-2000s and had seen quite significant rises all the way up until 2020. But then with pandemic stimulus and reducing rates to zero, we saw speculative mania taking the median house price to over 900,000. But after that, house prices fell sharply, but the amazing thing is that they've stayed sideways for several years now. Now, if we wanted to measure the previous rate of incline during the 2010s, if we extend it forward, we can see that house prices have basically fallen back to that trend line. What that means is that if house prices kept rising at that previous similar rate, we'd currently be at that same position that we are now. Now, the thing that's even more amazing about New Zealand's house prices remaining flat for the past several years is that recently they've seen very sharp interest rate declines. August 24, 0.25% cut. October 24, 0.5% cut. November 24, 0.5% cut. February 25, 0.5% cut. April 25, 0.25%. And May 25, another 0.25% cut. So that's a 2.25% rate cut just in the past 12 months. So the New Zealand cash rate is currently sitting at 3.25%, which is significantly lower than Australia, where it's sitting at 3.85%. Now, when interest rates were being hiked, New Zealand definitely went harder than Australia, sending their cash rate to 5.5%, whereas in Australia, the highest we got to was 4.35%. But considering that New Zealand has absolutely slashed rates recently, I would have expected house prices to probably rebound, and that's because in Australia, every single rate cut just seems to lead to higher bloody house prices. Come to think of it, almost everything seems to lead to higher bloody house prices. If we look at some regional house price changes over the last 12 months, there's a few regions where house prices have risen, but there's more areas where house prices have fallen, especially in Wellington. Now, if we change the time frame to show changes only in the past 3 months, we can see that there's only been 2 regions where house prices have risen, but in the last 3 months, nearly all regions, house prices have fallen. And in Gisborne, Marlborough, Wellington, Nelson, Tasman, West Coast and Auckland, they've all fallen over 1%. Now remember, interest rates have been slashed, yet in the last 3 months, house price falls have continued. To me, this is unbelievable, but only because I live in Australia where something like this would be unheard of. According to an article from One Roof, high home listing volumes combined with uncertainty of the employment market are keeping a lid on house prices. Those home buyers who are holding out for a bargain have definitely been rewarded. And this is another thing which is in complete contrast to Australia, where if you're a home buyer and you wait, you generally have to pay hundreds of thousands extra to get into the market at a higher price. Who would have thought there's a country where you can wait to buy a home and end up with more favorable conditions? And because the cash rate has dropped to 3.25%, mortgage rates, which were previously around 7%, are now sitting around 5%. The market's being described as one of the friendliest in years for first-time home buyers. And according to columnist Tony Alexander, first home buyers also face relatively little competition. So here we have a country where it's actually a buyer's market. You've got little competition from other buyers, meaning you can take your time, put in low offers, and potentially grab a bargain. Now I know house prices are still bloody high in New Zealand, and many people let me know that. But because house prices have significantly fallen in many areas, plus interest rates and mortgage rates have fallen sharply, affordability is much better than it previously was. And on top of that, buyers have the luxury of just taking their time. First home buyers in Australia would be looking over at New Zealand in bloody envy, just wishing some of the conditions would be in their favour. But I know relatives who've been currently looking to buy a home, and it's still absolute madness out there. And this is now several years after the COVID-inspired housing boom. Australia's housing market is an absolute freaking disaster. But at least New Zealand gives us a glimmer of hope that housing affordability actually can improve. Now, if we look at New Zealand house prices adjusted for inflation, the crash is even worse. This here is COVID, and basically house prices have crashed all the way back to there and even further. And that's because house prices in New Zealand for the last several years have been going sideways while inflation keeps rising. This graph shows how affordability has drastically improved. At the COVID peak with ultra high interest rates, the average household was spending over 45% of their income to repay the mortgage. But ever since rates have been dropping, it's now almost down to 35%. Still bloody high, but much freaking better. So New Zealand's seen house prices get smashed, but just recently, rent prices have also fallen, with the details of rental bonds lodged falling into the negative for the first time since 2009. Now I believe there's two main reasons for New Zealand's housing crash. First, immigration levels are low because so many people have been leaving the country. And second, the economy's in bad shape with a high unemployment level. New Zealand just doesn't have the insane demand that Australia has for housing. But could that change in the future? Melbourne has proved that house prices don't always rise super sharply in every city. When you tax the crap out of property, demand tends to be reduced. And because Australia as a nation is spending so much bloody money, I feel it's inevitable they're going to be looking for more taxes. And one of the easiest places I believe they'll look at will be property, because Australians have trillions of dollars invested in real estate, so it may not be long before they come after your homes. New Zealand's proved that house prices can crash, and crash bloody hard, so there has to at least be a chance it could also happen in Australia. I'm Biko Konstantinos.